Hi everyone, my name's Jad, and I read The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde so that you don't have to. I'm gonna start off by just asking a quick question. Maybe one of you watching could maybe explain this to me. Why is it called The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde and not The Portrait of Dorian Gray, since it is about the portrait that was made for Dorian Gray? If you guys have an answer, just leave that in the comments. I'm just going to go ahead now and start off with the who, what, where, when, why, and in this section I'll also include how, because this short novel includes many complicated features. Complicated in a literary style, but also complicated in a philosophical style, and I'll touch on that in a second. So we know that this story is about Dorian Gray, who also gets called another name. Prince Charming. Now this name is used sincerely during the first part of the story, and then used as a sort of stab at his character, as a insult. It's used in a mocking tone later on, and I'll touch on that again a little bit later, since I want to try to go in a chronological form throughout this story. What is this story about? Well, it's about, it's about corruption of the soul. I know that's a really interesting idea to throw out right at the beginning of the story, but it is in this way about corruption. And I'll also just say philosophy. It's a philosophical novel. We could also say, just to clarify it a little bit more, if we're talking about genre, I'll write that down here. What genre is this story? It's categorized as Gothic, and in this case I would call it a Gothic novel in the tradition of, what is used in English, I'd say. The English literary tradition. Lots of novels fall under this categorization, particularly novels that were written during the 17th, 18th, and into the 19th century. Multiple novels during this time period as well exhibited aspects of Gothic novels. If we think about the sort of dark and dingy 19th century that it gets portrayed in Sherlock Holmes, for example, both Arthur Conan Doyle's serialization and the TV shows, any sort of Charles Dickens 19th century representation, plays a lot with these generic tropes of, not necessarily always referring to The Walking Dead or vampires or aspects that we might know, synonymous with Gothic culture, but with these ideas of murder, of disease, of corruption of the soul, like I mentioned before. So important to think about that if you're not really too sure exactly what, Gothic novel in the literary tradition means. A quick Google search or a quick YouTube search and some sort of historical context would serve you very well right here. To carry on, where was this story based? Well, that's easy because we know, well, many of us hopefully know at this point, since the novel was written in English and the novel was written by Oscar Wilde, who himself was from Ireland, we can say that it was written in London or centered in London, and I'll just say the United Kingdom right here. When was it based, and also when was it written? The 19th century. But of course, it goes, kind of conceptually travels through time, since, we're talking about the end of the 19th century. I would also, write here Victorian era, not only just referring to, the where, but also the when. It's a very specific idea. It's a mode that this author uses. Why? Why is this novel? I love these questions when I ask myself, why is this novel? It has multiple points to discuss, and I'll write them down and hit on them as I go. It discusses hedonism. This is this question, for example, of like the philosophy of the story. It discusses hedonism. Hedonism, which would mean the pleasure-seeking or pleasure-searching forces of life, the reasons to live. It investigates narcissism. This would be individual narcissism or the narcissism of the age, which we could, largely equate to, materialism, pleasure-seeking, not so different from the hedonistic lifestyles of this time. And we could also think about, what ends up happening in the United States around this gilded era, this gilded age of, capital, personal freedom, etc. Personal, enterprise in this case, putting a lot of value into your individuality. When you have money, in this case, in this case of the story, Oscar Wilde's story of Dorian Gray, someone who is financially stable and independent. It is about sensualism. In this case, living through the senses and allowing the soul to experience life. In this case, it's more of a stretch, an idea. I'm mainly quoting the story of the use of senses, to live through your senses, in this case, seeking pleasure. Like I said, it is about corruption. But it's, I would say that the word here is to spoil, because this is something that is a chief concern with these characters and how they fall, in this case, or how they are spoiled. I'll write that down right here because it's a beautiful word, and again, it falls into this Gothic tradition. And the last point that I had is a bit of a split, and I kept this here so I would keep it split. Virtue, and how virtue changes with age, and innocence. Oops. You know me and my spelling, like last time I spelled ridiculous incorrectly. Innocence. Innocence in the way that we could see it also affecting youth, but also affecting, how people perceive the world. Your perspective could be innocent in terms of how you view society or how you view yourself fitting into society, especially as Dorian Gray descends into, bad habits, visiting an opium den, for example, later on in the story. So there you have it. I'm going to clean this blackboard up in just a second, and then I'll touch on some of the characters and discuss some of these hows, or some of these, ideas. Oh, actually, I didn't hit on how. How is very important. Again, there's not a lot of space here, so I'm just going to delete this genre word. And cut that. How is used with a literary device. That pen is kind of blurry. Which is aphorisms, or the use of aphoristic language. And essentially, aphoristic language is a nice, concise sentence that someone might use that conveys a general truth about life, something that people could get behind, or, less likely, they might debate or disagree with. But generally, we could say that if someone says, not a great example here, but the grass is always greener on the other side. This is a type of aphorism that uses a type of metaphor to say that grass is like life. It's always greener when it's, someone else's. Someone else's happiness is always a little bit more intense than your own happiness in this case. That would be my definition of that example, of that aphorism. Particularly, one character uses aphorisms to describe and to dissect life, to convince and persuade Dorian Gray, to follow the life of sensualism, to follow the life of aestheticism, to heighten beauty, to elevate art instead of, humanity, being a decent human being and virtue. And this is Lord Henry. And I'll talk about the characters in just a second after I wipe away all of these notes that I have on the blackboard. Okay, without referring to Dorian Gray, I'm going to list the characters as they appear in importance. We have the artist. Who is Basil? Oops. Hallward. This is the artist who paints the picture of Dorian Gray. Oops, sorry, that's Hallward. We have the devil in this case. Not necessarily, a perfect caricature of a devil, but this is Lord Henry. Lord Henry is the one who convinces, through his own, speech, and also by giving Dorian Gray a book that convinces him on, the virtues of living a life of pleasure, to put it as simply as I can. We have Sybil Vane, and I love that name. I think it's very cute. Oops, sorry. She is the love. And Sybil Vane also has this other name that she goes by, Juliet, since she is an actress in the story. She plays Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, and I'm putting that in red right there because it is a huge piece of foreshadowing. I'll write that here. Which is another literary device that Oscar Wilde uses to illustrate, what happens to these characters and what can we sort of expect to happen if you're aware of the literary tradition in English literature, or, if we think about Dorian Gray is also referred to as Prince Charming. We can always guess, what happens to these people. Life isn't always great, especially when stories are based within a Gothic tradition, like we know Oscar Wilde has in this story. We have Alan Campbell, who is, I'd say here, friend number one. I think it's Campbell or Campbell. Campbell. Of course, the names need to be extra complicated with P's and B's right next to each other. And we have Adrian Singleton. I'll say here, friend number two. Now, these two characters, friend number one and friend number two, aren't necessarily, pivotal characters to the story. They don't really matter. What really is important about these characters is that they both suffer at the hands or at the consequence of Dorian Gray because of his actions or because of, what he ends up doing to them. I'll start up at the top with what happens with the artist, and I'll give you a quick rundown of how the story unfolds. Dorian Gray is a young man. We could guess that he's either, online it said that he's 20. I read a couple of different sources, but he is a young man who is sort of about to enter society and earn a lot of money, so we can guess that he's going to become a gentleman who has some money. This is Dorian Gray. We have the artist, who is Basil, paints a portrait, paints a picture of Dorian Gray. This catches the eye of Basil's friend, Lord Henry. Lord Henry says, "Wow, what a beautiful young man. I'm totally taken by him, just like Basil is." This creates this triangle of friendship, of hedonism, of pleasure seeking. They all want to enjoy life. They all want to live a life of luxury. This is something that Dorian is able to do now, since he's just inherited a bunch of money from his grandfather. They can begin living the life. Dorian is a bit naive, doesn't exactly know how to follow this life. He takes after the devil, in this case, Lord Henry, who teaches him how to, enjoy cigarettes, for example. In this case, that symbol for decadence. Actually, I'll write that down. Decadence is another one of these themes: pleasure-seeking, hedonism. And we can basically say, if we wanted to simplify the story as much as we could, Dorian Gray falls into this life of decadence and pleasure-seeking until his demise at the end of the story. And if this is a surprise to you, at the end of the story, Dorian Gray succumbs to death at his own hand. In this case, he commits suicide, to put it in another way. But it's not necessarily important that he kills himself. It's really how he arrives to that point. Basically, there's some sort of magic that goes on with Basil's painting. The artist captures Dorian's soul inside of the painting, and in one way to say it, the painting ages and the painting suffers the human illnesses, the human decay, while Dorian Gray's body is sort of untouched and does not age. So throughout the story, about 20 years or so have passed. In this case, they talk about 18 or 20. The picture of Dorian Gray is aged and is, the person behind, or the person in the painting, is totally decayed and dying and full of, atrophy. But Dorian is still sort of a man of 18 or 20, or however old he was when the painting was painted. This is a huge shock to everyone around him, which is, one of the reasons why people still want to hang out with him and adore him and think he's beautiful, because he has this eternal youth. This is still the reason why Lord Henry adores him, and why others keep him in high society. Since he is a gentleman, he has a lot of financial security. He doesn't really need to work. He can just live a life of decadence and luxury. Now, that's generally the start to finish of the story. But what happens is, he meets this ingenue, I guess. He has this relationship with Sybil Vane, who is a 17-year-old actress who he sees at the theater. He falls in love with her, wants to marry her. A perspective change, happens where he, describes her to Lord Henry and Basil. They all go and attend the play to see her. For some reason, he gets convinced basically by the devil, or in this case, Lord Henry, who makes him view Sybil in a new light, as someone who is more human, not just necessarily like an artistic accessory, someone who has, human feelings. To learn that Sybil is a human, living, breathing human with volatile emotional states, just like everyone does, really turns Dorian Gray off of her, and off of the idea of marriage, and off of the idea of a life of, we would say, like, moralistic love, of monogamy, of what we would say would be considered, values of the time, and goes on to the other side of the spectrum of, decadence and debauchery and all of that. This, he basically, there's this devastating part where, Dorian Gray describes to Sybil, you're totally not my type. I don't want to be involved with someone like you. The idea of you is also detestable. You're not as good as I thought you were. You were a fine artist, but now that you're sort of involved, with love, I think that, this is a bad idea. One thing leads to another, and this causes her to consume poison and kill herself. And it's this, interesting, allusion to Juliet, but not only that, of Ophelia, of other literary characters that Oscar Wilde includes throughout this story. And it's a great, metafictional jump to different aspects to reference other literary classics and other literary traditions, not only within the time period of Victorian era, but also we could say Shakespeare, we could say, even prior to Shakespeare when we're thinking of, medieval stories. And again, I won't get into that too much. I know that's a claim that I'm making right now, but just to save some time. Alan Campbell is, comes up as a friend, and so does Adrian Singleton. These are friends that he has during his younger years. As the years go by, 20 years after Sybil Vane's death, that has, sincerely marked Dorian Gray and changed his life completely, and viewed life as a form of, pleasure. But pleasure begins to act a bit like a drug to sort of deal and cope with living with guilt, living with shame, even though, the physical strain on his body is now exhibited in the painting. Dorian Gray does suffer a lot of mental anguish and, tries to cope with that by seeking pleasure, never really achieving happiness, never really achieving a sense of, self-worth in this case. Alan Campbell and Adrian Singleton both don't want anything to do with Dorian anymore. They think that his reputation is soiled, and it's specifically soiled by, the death of Sybil Vane. This is, the second part of the story, if we want to consider it like that, where this title of Prince Charming is, sort of characterizes Dorian Gray as like a lady killer, in like a horrible literal and metaphorical, in a metaphorical way. His reputation is, it's fine in some circles because he's beautiful, but everyone knows that his personality and his values are absolute garbage. They've declined severely. What happens later, I'll hit a couple major plot points just to make sure that the video is over very soon. Basil comes and pays Dorian a visit. This is much later. And something terrible happens. What happens is Basil sees the painting because Dorian shows him the painting. The painting is, exactly like I just described, depicting a man who has decayed severely. Dorian tries to explain that it's some sort of like magic or some sort of like religious punishment or some sort of reason. Basil wants to pray to God, to try to find some sort of answer or some sort of explanation for this. One thing leads to another. Dorian murders Basil. This is, the second death, we could say, that Dorian is responsible for. To try to get rid of the body that is in, his attic, essentially, he elicits the help of Alan, who is a scientist, in this case, a chemist, to come and dissolve the body. He kind of blackmails Alan to do that. Alan then also suffers, and later we find out that he dies. He commits suicide too, because he is, completely guilt-ridden, this way that, we could say like a domino effect of, moral decay. Basically, you keep on poisoning everyone around you, in this case, Dorian Gray, because of, what happens in being susceptible to so much influence by Lord Henry and the type of lifestyle that he's been living. It is infectious, and it is a poison, and you can see how it sort of trickles down and affects everybody in this story. Alan Campbell, who then helps dissolve Basil's body, in this case burn it in a chemical fire. He ends up killing himself. Adrian has also fallen as well, the second friend. loses his money. Dorian meets him at an opium den where they, go and basically smoke a bunch of opium to try to deal with, their shame, their sins. This is something that they refer to in the story as, the old sins cleansing the modern sins from our bodies, or to pacify them or to dull them. In this case, it's a really great example of opium and basically drugs and pleasure. Pleasure is usually a simple thing that ends up clouding or masking what is actually a deep-seated problem. And this is the issue that I think Oscar Wilde talks about when discussing how hedonism or narcissism or all of these ego words of this 100 years of this Victorian era that then definitely bleed well into the 20th century and 21st century, especially when we're thinking about social media and public and private image. These are great ideas to think about today, to discuss, not only in classrooms but in society as a whole. These are bad things in life, and they're important to study. And I think that this book does a really great job in highlighting these points. So I definitely recommend to read this book on your own. It's quite short. It's a short novel. Adrian Singleton, again, he's fallen into this, life of an addict. The story ends essentially by Dorian Gray committing suicide, like I said. And to end this video, he does so by also trying to destroy his painting. In attempt to do so, we can see that he's killed himself. I hope I'm correct in this, because I just finished the book let's say 30 minutes ago. Stabs himself in the heart, and basically what happens is that his painting, the painting that Basil painted of him, his picture, returns to exactly the way that he had looked when he was 18 or 20 when the painting was completed, and his body then exchanges the decay, and people break into his room in the attic and discover a disgusting, decayed soul and a decayed body. Someone that they can only recognize from the rings on his fingers. I think that that's what they said, the last line. Moral of the story, again, if we wanted to sort of think, what's the conclusion here? The conclusion is that your shame is something that you take along with you for the rest of your life. The book talks a lot about, how you deal with your past and focusing on the future and trying to be, someone that how do you live with yourself is this question that the book asks. And even though it's not necessarily prescriptive, it does show you the pitfalls of living a life of pleasure, a life purely for pleasure purposes, the life of aestheticism, the life of sensualism. This is the word, sorry, I was trying to think of that one. I highly recommend giving it a read. I highly recommend watching the movie too if you haven't seen the movie. Came out in the 2000s, I think. Great movie. I think I might watch it again just because I think this story is awesome. And that's all I have for you. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like and subscribe to this page. Thanks so much.